Recording a TV is a lot harder than it probably sounds. It's not as simple as just pointing a camera at the TV and then making a video. So this is going to be a different kind of video where I kind of go behind the scenes to show the difficulties in it, as well as show off a couple different cameras. One is a Panasonic Lumix S5, which is on sale for $2,000, normally $2,300 with the lens. And the other is the Sony FX3 cinema camera that is $3,800, doesn't come with a lens, and after accessories and lenses, I'm about $7,000 into that kit. So I'm going to shoot both cameras in a couple different ways and show how it looks, and just show how, not only just how difficult it is to shoot a TV and have it come out looking like it does on the TV, but to also show how you can shoot in different ways and how it affects everything. So here's the Sony FX3, and so the first step that I do is trying to get it aligned properly, and this takes quite a long time actually, and it's a lot harder than it sounds. So I throw up a pattern like this, and it's just a lot of moving the camera one way or another, moving the tripod more to the right, and then turning the camera to the left, or moving the camera to the right, and then moving the tripod back to the left, and then you got to get the height right, the zoom right. Once you get everything aligned, then we're going to go in and look at some of the settings where you can go very deep in the settings, but we're going to start with the file formats. So you can shoot in H.264 or H.265, 4K or 1080p, and then different file sizes. And then there's 422 chroma, 420, there's 10-bit, 8-bit, just a lot of options. The more compressed the file format is, so if you use H.265, the harder it's going to be on your computer. I have an Intel i9 processor with an RTX 3070, and these files can be very hard even on my computer. So that's something to keep in mind, where the other files, H.264, can take up a lot more space, needing bigger memory cards, and some modes require certain kinds of memory cards that are very expensive for this camera. So there's a lot of other options here. There's exposure settings, ISO ranges that you can set, white balance, which I'll get into in a minute how to do that. The zebra is those black and white lines showing you when you're overexposed. Then for the external output, that's if you're using HDMI out to a monitor, so you have settings for that, which is what I like to do. I like to go out to my LG C1, which is calibrated, and use that for a monitor so I know how it actually looks. Now I'm going to go through all the normal settings here, and I like to use manual everything when shooting TVs. So let's start here with the white balance, and you're going to see that can't take the white balance yet. It's going to fail. And that's because the exposure isn't right and it's just too overexposed. So we need to fix that. So the lens that I'm using on this right now is the 20mm Sony G lens. It's a 1.8 aperture, and it was fully open, or wide open. So it was taking in as much light as possible. And so you got to drag that down. Now we're not overexposed anymore, but you want to be just a little bit over, or leaning towards a little bit overexposed is fine, because you can pull that down afterwards once you get on your computer. So now, if that's okay, we can do white balance, and you do that by just dragging that little box on something white or neutral gray. So I like this scene on the Spears and Munzel disc. It seems to work well. And then here you can see how you can alter that. So someone who's nefarious could use really messed up white balance settings to make TVs look different ways, look too green, too blue, too red, whatever. And even if they're not, they could just improperly or not set white balance or use auto white balance. And when you do that, it's not going to look accurate at all compared to what you're seeing in person, especially with an OLED. OLEDs will always look more blue if you don't set the white balance the correct way. So now I'm changing the shutter speed, and you can see as it goes higher, the image is getting darker. As it goes lower, it gets brighter, but it's also going to affect the way motion looks. So typically I try to do double the shutter speed of the frame rate I'm shooting at. So since I'm shooting at 60 FPS, I want to be around 120 on the shutter speed. Something else you got to deal with is batteries dying. Another problem with shutter speed, though, is it can cause flicker when recording a TV, so we'll show that later as well. Now, ISO is very important. You typically want to shoot at your camera's native ISO setting. So on the Sony, it's 640. So that means my shutter speed is pretty much determined by the motion that I want it to capture and not get flickering. And my ISO I want at native, so the only other option to adjust how bright or dark or how exposed it is the aperture. So that's why having a good lens with good aperture control is really important. So now you can see where it says 0.7 at the bottom of the screen. That's how over or underexposed it is. So keeping it within 2 stops is usually pretty good, so +2 or -2. Now if you were to put it on an automatic mode and let the aperture change automatically, then the problem with that is like a scene like this where you have a lot of dark and bright areas, it would get confused, and you can put it into a spot mode where it's going to adjust it based on that spot, or you can do a scene, but it never really works well when shooting TVs, so that's why I like to do manual. So right here I'm going through some different picture profiles to show different settings. So you can shoot in what's called log, where it's very flat, and then you can add a LUT later and color grade it, but that's more work, but we'll get to that later as well. So here on the Sony, I like this S-Cinetone with these settings. It took a long time to figure them out, but it actually works pretty well, and again, we'll see that later. But here's one of the hardest problems with shooting a TV, especially with very high resolution or these full frame cameras that have a lot of detail, is once you adjust the sharpness or the focus, then you get these lines. This is moire. It also looks like a screen door effect. So when you're at your most focused and it looks the sharpest, that's what you see as well. So the way to fix this is when you really want to use manual focus and then just slowly back it off until that just disappears. And it is going to soften your image a little bit. It won't be as sharp, but it's a sacrifice you have to make. Then you want to turn the focus back up just to make sure you didn't go too far, and then back down and up and down and up and down until you find that exact sweet spot where you don't see any screen door or moire effect, but you have as much sharpness and focus as you can. Otherwise, it's just going to look blurry. And even doing all that, it still will look softer than it does in person, but a lot of people watch YouTube on their phones or in a small window on a monitor, etc., so it's not going to be as big, and it does help not look as soft. Alright, so now in a scene like this with a nice blue sky, if you're too overexposed, that blue, or even like this blue in this water here, is going to lose its color. And so the more underexposed, the more it captures the color. The more overexposed, the more blown out and white it turns. But if you underexpose, then you don't see any shadow detail. If you overexpose, you can see the shadow detail. You lose some of the color, and then your highlights get blown out. The simple truth is no camera out can capture the full dynamic range of HDR TVs, so you have to find the balance of just what can capture the most and decide how much shadow detail you want to sacrifice versus the highlights. So now here we have both cameras. So we got the Panasonics on the left and the Sony on the right. The top were shot, both of them, in their log formats, and then the ARRI Alexa LUT applied. The bottom ones were just shot in their best out of camera modes with very minor adjustments using Adobe Rush. So now we're going to see how different the same TV with the same settings can look just based on how you shoot it and what camera you use. And this is only 4 options out of many cameras with many different ways of shooting with each camera. So I have spent a lot of money and time and gone through a lot of cameras and been trying to find what is going to be the most accurate way of capturing the TVs. So with this setup, all of these are fairly close, and I'm going to go over the positives and minuses on all of them, and I'm going to watch this demo on my A90J while I'm watching this footage, and then tell you in scene to scene which one is more accurate in which way. So on this scene, the bottom left, the out-of-camera Panasonic, actually has the best color saturation, especially that orangish on the ground, and also the shadow detail by the trees on the right side is matching what's shown on the TV. The Sony out of the camera on the bottom right, those white clouds, were more like the TV. So in this one, again, that saturation on the ground is more correct on the S5. However, the color of the green trees in the back or more correct, on the Sony. Now this one's more interesting because the S5 on the bottom was way too orange in the grass, whereas the S5 with the LUT looked right. And then here, the S5 on the bottom, the sun in the background held its color. And then this one, you can see the water is flickering a lot on the Sony. Now this one, again, it's flickering, but the bottom right is doing that sun and the clouds the most accurate. And now this one for shadow detail. None of them can do it right, but the bottom right FX3 one was the closest, especially with the color of the sky in the back. Alright, the next scene is very difficult for cameras, but the bottom left one, the orange, is correct in the sky, and you have the most detail down there in that little town, without the blacks being what appears to be lifted, or the contrast just not being there. Now this one's also really difficult to get that saturation on the mountain right, which I would give to the S5 again. Also with the detail, it's just so much sharper. You don't have to reduce the focus as much as I did with the Sony. On this one, however, the Panasonic makes that rock look too orange, and it shouldn't, so that's where the Sony looked better. Now this one's very interesting because I'm shooting an OLED. The only one that actually looks like a black background like an OLED should is the S5 shot at a camera. The ones with the LUTs, the black level's raised, and then the Sony out of camera, it's raised as well. However, the bottom FX3 image is also the most color accurate through the flower, the feather, and the honeycomb, while also capturing the brightness correctly. However, after seeing all this, I see that the Panasonic needs to have a little bit of orange pulled out of it, because that's really the only thing that seems to be happening consistently is just too much orange, so I should be able to adjust some settings and fix that. And then here, the Panasonic, actually that flower did look more orange and correct than the Sony. And then coming to this butterfly, the yellow body isn't correct on either. It should be more yellow than the Sony, less orange than the Panasonic. However, the red on that butterfly was spot on with the Sony. And then this butterfly, got to give it and the red flowers to the FX3 on the bottom. And then this one's interesting because that yellow flower on the bottom Sony is not yellow. The Panasonic is more correct, but then the Sony has better reds for the roses, and overall it was the top LUT Sony that looked the best in that scene. So it's getting a little hard to keep up talking through each scene because they go by so quick. But let's do this one, where again the bottom left has that true black background, but Sony did better with the green, Panasonic did better with the blue. Here it's the brightness and just contrast with the dark blacks look better on the bottom left, the S5 out of camera. All of them kind of struggle with shadow detail here, but the one thing with the LUTs is it does show a little more shadow detail, especially in this scene and then the next one. But I am getting some flicker on the Sony again. However, there's a little bit more noise in the sky on the Panasonic. This one, again, that deep black, but still been able to make out the Ferris wheel, I think is a clear win for the Panasonic on the bottom left. So I think that's enough of going scene by scene, and my conclusion is that I think the Panasonic, not just for the money, but even if they were equally priced, seems to just be easier. The files are smaller, easier to work with, and the dynamic range seems very similar. I'm able to get a little more focus and sharpness without screen door effect or moire. Shadow detail seems to be just a little bit better on it, while the Sony seems to capture more brightness in the highlights. The colors, it depends on the color which one's better. Like I said, the greens and stuff seem to be better on the Sony. However, I think I can work that out with the Panasonic pulling out some orange. Just got to try that out. And the whites on the Sony, that could just come down to the fact that the white balance setting on it is easier to use. So it probably just had a better white balance. Again, something I could work on more with the Panasonic. The S5 also has shutter angle, so there's more options with the shutter speed, which is why it's able to eliminate the flickering from the shutter. So I think that's a major plus for it. So then when you do factor in the cost difference and that it's around a third of the price, and it's just easier to just shoot and work with and doesn't take as much time because it does a really good job overall on average, that I don't need to shoot in log and then put a LUT on it. If you're gonna shoot TVs, I think it's a really good option, a really good price. In some ways, the Sony is better, and I think if you work a little bit harder at color grading and applying LUTs and stuff, which I'm not anywhere near an expert on, it's probably better. But I figured I would use the same LUT on both just to eliminate that variable to show the difference of the cameras more so than the LUTs, and that's why I used a LUT from Ari, which looked really good compared to some of the other options. Just keep in mind that other people out there that want to shoot an HLG and throw a Rec 709 LUT on it and think that that's going to make it look like it does or what they're seeing, that's a really bad option. So anyone that says they're doing that, you're not seeing what they're seeing in person. That said, like I said, this is a different kind of video. Not sure how many people would have stuck around and watched through the whole thing, but if you did, thank you. Appreciate it. I'll catch you in the next one. I'll have A90J videos coming up soon. Have a good one.